I'm Susan, and I am a failed parent. I started out strong. I read all the books. I had annual passes to everything educational in San Diego County, and I took my sons all the time. I read to them an hour every night before they went to bed, and my husband and I steadfastly enforced screen limits. My husband Mark and I raised our two sons, Nick and Jake, here on Solana Beach. And I should have succeeded. I had everything going for me. There are no excuses to be made. I was healthy, I was educated, I was professionally established, and we even owned our own business, which meant I had a little flexibility in my working hours. And I had a plan to raise my sons that involved me providing an epic level of concierge service and them going on to a series of high-ranking academic achievements. But nonetheless, as the stakes got higher, 7th grade and 8th grade, whether you take honors, math, or English, determines what APs you'll be eligible for in high school. And whatever you do in high school determines your entire fate, whether you go to college, where you go to college, and all the rest of your life. And still, despite knowing that, I continued to drop the ball time and time again. It's incredibly hard to be perfect every single day for 20 years. Because Nick was so verbal, we were shocked when he got to 1st grade in our excellent school district, and he wasn't learning to read along with his peers. And no one could tell us why. We thought eventually it would come along. He had a great vocabulary, he could spell, he loved to be read too, and he could sit still for hours. But we could not figure out what was wrong. Until one Saturday, using those annual passes, we were at Legoland, and standing in line for the boat ride, looking at the Lego man lifeguard in the distance who holds a big green book with big white letters that say how to swim, a perfect joke for a 1st grader. I pointed to it with Nick and said, "Nick, tell me the title of the book the lifeguard's reading." And Nick looked at me and he looked at the statue and he was sure there was a trick in here somewhere. And he said, "Mom, there are no letters on that book." And I realized my son couldn't read because he couldn't see and he was 2 years into his schooling. We had missed hundreds of hours of practice, and he was way behind. And his academic self-confidence had been completely destroyed. He didn't believe he could learn. He thought for sure he was the dumbest kid in class. 48 hours later, we were in front of a pediatric ophthalmologist. Nick had glasses, and he had 90 days worth of exercises to retrain his eyes to focus together continually across the page to read. But not only was his academic self-confidence destroyed, if you can't continually refocus your eyes, you also can't do anything involving a ball. So he wasn't having a good time at school, and he wasn't having a good time at recess. So we had a 1st grader who was pretty discouraged about things. And while we explained to him it wasn't his fault, it was the adult's fault, there was no way out of this except for him to double down and put the hours in. And no matter how much we loved him and supported him, there was no way that we could do all that work. And eventually, Nick did learn to read. In fact, he became an avid reader, but I hadn't learned my lesson. I still continued to make mistake after mistake, just not able day after day to keep 100% of my attention on everything I needed to pay attention to. A few years later, after this, when my younger son Jake was in 5th grade, as I locked the front door, setting off to walk to school with him, Jake looked at me and said, "Mom, I have a book report due." Well, in our school district, book reports are typically assigned about a month ahead of time. So over a month, I have no idea that this assignment is on my 5th grader's plate. So I unlock the front door, I make a few phone calls to clear the professional decks of my professional life after I call the school and make up an imaginary dentist appointment. So I lie to the school in front of my kid, and we sit down in the book report, and I type, well, Jake dictates the book report to me. An hour later, we print it out, we go to school, and Jake drops it off. So I've made all kinds of mistakes, but I'm still not learning my lesson. One day, with all these activities crammed into our life, there were a lot of mad dashes. We go out to the garage, and the boys get in the back seat, and without looking, I say, "Does everybody have their seatbelt on?" And I get 2 yeses. So I put the car in reverse, and I back out of the garage. About 2 feet, and there's a horrendous crash. Well, when you ask non-drivers if their seatbelts are on, what I have to tell you today is it's an idea worth spreading that doesn't mean that they've closed the doors to the car. So the garage door is no longer closable, neither is the car door, but we get out and we assess the damage. And when you live with 2 small boys, you expect a certain amount of property damage. And there's a special kind of silence when boys stand back with an adult and assess that damage and find out whether it's their fault or not. And I would have loved for it to have been their fault, but it was mine. I was the driver, I was the adult. But we sprang into action. I worked on the garage door with the emergency release to close it, and the boys, who were not that big, did their best to bend the car door back into place. Through all these series of disasters, I did start to notice something, not enough to make me modify my plan at the time. But when I failed to show up, or I did a bad job, Nick and Jake rose to the occasion. And they achieved some kind of an outcome that was completely satisfactory to them. It wasn't my outcome. I don't think it was any adult's outcome. But they were really happy about it. And they were gaining great skills and a lot of self-confidence. Nick, who couldn't learn to read, well, by age 8, Nick had completely internalized the idea that when you hit a bad spot, it doesn't really matter how you got there. You're there. And the only way out is to change your strategy and redouble and dig yourself out of that hole. And he knew that at age 8, instinctively. Jake did his homework at the last possible second for his entire academic career. But Jake is awesome at the strategic last-minute pivot. He knows it's coming, and you need to have multiple options in your pocket to make that move. And both my sons are great at triage. When we went on vacation, we like to completely unplug. So we did a lot of rafting and kayaking vacations, which when you leave from San Diego, the first few days usually involve a road trip. I like to not even make hotel reservations. And that worked, like so much in parenting, really well until it didn't. And one summer, we ended up down a long country road, knowing that we couldn't find a hotel room anywhere near us. And we put the boys in the front seat of the car with the seats down flat in their sleeping bags, and we locked them in. And Mark, an expert outdoorsman, pitched our tent in the dark next to the car. And when we woke up in the morning, Mark and I were congratulating ourselves. We taught the boys something. I don't know what we taught them, and I don't think we were sure then, but we knew we taught them something about being flexible or living without Wi-Fi, something valuable. And then we turned and we looked back over the tent, and we saw across the street the thing we hadn't seen the night before in the dark. There was a huge sheet of plywood, and it was a spray-painted sign, and it said, "Please don't shoot our local pet wolf." San Diego is a suburban area. I didn't really factor wolves or guns into my perfect plan. Probably because we did all of these outdoorsy vacations. When Nick was 16, he really wanted to be Wilderness First Responder certified. If you've never heard of this program, National Outdoor Leadership School runs it all over the US and practically every week in the summer. And you become WFR certified. It's basically backcountry medicine, what to do in an emergency in the wilderness when traditional first responders aren't going to be able to help you until you get yourself back out to a more suburban setting. But the only time that he could do this program that fit into our schedule as a family, it was at CU Boulder. So there was no housing despite being on a college campus. So we looked online and we found a motel that looked like it was walking distance to where he needed to be each day on that part of the CU campus. So Mark got on a plane and flew to Denver, rented a car, and he and Nick drove to Boulder. And then Mark got back in that rental car and drove back to the airport and flew home to San Diego because neither one of us could afford to sit around Colorado in a motel room and try and work remotely for the better part of 2 weeks. So we left our son alone in another state with a credit card, a cell phone, and a shuttle reservation back to the Denver airport. And at the time, we told no one because to this day, I do not know that this is a legal thing to do. And a lot of things could have gone wrong. And despite this photograph, it was backcountry medicine, nothing did go wrong. I did dozens of desperate things like this over the years. I thought this was the idea of having it all. And still, I kept trying to enforce screen limits, the bane of all parents. In fact, so much so that in one of those office and home moves, I required that Jake not go home when he was going to be alone. Not because I was afraid to have my son home alone, but because I knew perfectly well he was going to get on that screen and play video games till the moment he heard a car pull into the driveway. But I had started to realize that the more I let my sons do things by themselves, the more they were learning. And if you want to raise resilient, capable adults, which is what everyone is shooting for, you have to let them practice. And that seems so obvious to me now, but it wasn't obvious to me as a young parent. When Jake was in school, he was a junior at Denison University, he flew home one winter break, and he told us he had a plan. He had had a hard time figuring out what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. None of his passions logically led anywhere. And he had sort of settled on the idea that maybe he'd be a consultant when he graduated. So when he came downstairs and he told Mark and me that he had a plan and he was really excited about it. For starters, he'd figured out how he could graduate a semester early by dropping a double major down to a major and a minor, so he could start his new life. And what he wanted to do was play video games professionally. And I thought, well, we started our own business. We're a little more comfortable with crazy ideas than a lot of people, because I know a lot of people have to write a bad business plan or a bad screenplay until they write a good business plan or a good screenplay, or they just decide they're not an entrepreneur or a writer. And I thought Jake's plan, when I did a little research, actually seemed feasible. And I think the thing about this story is that our school system makes our kids really good at planning. If nothing else, by the time you get to high school, you have to plan like crazy so you can get into the college of your choice and major in the things you want to major in. And then when you get to college, and this is Nick's plan, not mine, you have to have a plan that lets you get your major, your minor, your concentrations, your emphasis, and all those general ed requirements. And meanwhile, a very expensive clock is ticking. And when you get done with all of that, you not only have to graduate, you want to be prepared for the career that you decided might be a great fit for you. I should have known better, because in my professional life, Mark and I own a small film production company that does commercial films for corporations. There is no way that my day looks anything like the day I planned the day before. And that's not true for my clients, and that's not true for my vendors. So if you're a new college grad and you're great at handling that syllabus with 27 items that come in a great logical direction, you'll be lucky if you make your own to-do list with 27 items. And when you come in, that first Slack message comes through, or an email or a phone call or whatever it is, and you need to be smart enough and fast on your feet to know that number 5 became number 1, but number 3 is moving fast and there's not enough hours in the week. You need to hand that off and find a teammate who can take it on. 14, 15, 16 don't matter. And by the way, one of our clients is buying a new corporation, spinning off that division. So there's a 28 and a 29. We're just surfing the chaos out there. And I don't know how, when I had this plan, knowing everything I know as a business person, that I thought some perfect childhood served up on a silver platter with nothing but academic success was going to leave my sons prepared for the real world. But I did. So how did this turn out? Well, Nick will be the first person to tell you my sample size is too small and it's not statistically evident. Because my kid who hated school wants to be a college professor. Nick went to University of Puget Sound, and he knew he wanted to be a scientist pretty early on. He spent 2 summers doing his own independent research, and his college professors helped him find a master's program that would be a good fit. So the day after graduation, he packed up his car, and he drove to Ames, Iowa, sleeping every night in a tent he pitched next to his car with all his worldly possessions. And he immediately started his first field season before he'd ever taken a single class in his ecology program. He just finished his 3rd field season, and he's got 5 or 6 papers, which is a lot for a master's, that he's shopping to various journals. And he just presented his research a few weeks ago at the Ecological Society of America's annual meeting. He's interviewing for PhD spots, and he's well on his way to enacting his plan to be a college professor. And I think the thing I've seen over the years, as much as I can't really explain Nick's research to you, is that what I've seen him hit time and time again is a dead spot, where the data doesn't work or his process is wrong, and he has to find that flaw. And he is unflappable because it took him 2 years longer than everyone else to learn to read. I think the reason Nick will be a fabulous faculty member somewhere long in the future after that PhD is done is because when he encounters a student who's having a hard time with science, that doesn't mean that that kid can't do it. If they want to work hard enough, he'll always believe that they can get where they want to go. And Jake, well, it sounds crazy, but it's called being an eSports athlete. That's Jake on the right. As Jake went back for his junior year in that cold Ohio winter, his school has been incredibly supportive and has very fast internet. Jake and his team, Bird Noises, continued to play a relatively new game known as Overwatch. And they won, and Jake got a lot of attention. He got a spot to play for Team USA in the Overwatch World Cup last summer. And if you're over a certain age, you probably don't realize this stuff exists. But we saw Jake play in the finals at the Anaheim Convention Center in a stadium that, I Googled it, holds about 7,500 people. It was standing room only. And in fact, lots of people wanted to take photos with Mark and me because we were Jake's parents. Jake plays under the name Jake, all in capital letters, so it's a lot less confusing for us than it might be for some of his teammates' parents. Jake was recruited to play for the Houston Outlaws. Jake is valuable not only because he's one of the best utility DPS players in the world right now, but also because of his shot calling ability. His ability on those microphones in a game that moves in split seconds so fast that I can really never be sure what's going on. He's able to scream out a new solution as things are changing and move the entire team with him. Jake's also become something of a spokesperson, not only for the Overwatch League, but eSports in general. He's been interviewed numerous times on podcasts and ESPN, and earlier this spring, he and one of his teammates, Raucus, flew back to New York City with about 2 days' warning to appear on the Today Show with Megyn Kelly. I think they were pretty relaxed about this because I don't think that they knew what the Today Show was or who Megyn Kelly was. There's nothing I could have done to prepare my 21-year-old to be on the Today Show. He also flew last month to Switzerland at the behest of the International Olympic Committee because they're beginning to have discussions about what a future Olympics, not too far into the future, will look like with the addition of eSports. I wanted to give my sons this incredibly sweet, fluffy, picture-perfect childhood. Didn't turn out that way. I like to think that perfection, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, but that's only me hoping. I think that my plan had a foundational flaw that I see so many other parents making themselves crazy with the same exact flaw. On the most micro task possible, laundry, I thought that my job was to teach my sons to use every setting on that washing machine and to separate their lights from their darks and train them to do that laundry every weekend so they were ready for whatever the week would hold. And the really great thing I did, partly because I was busy, is I stood back and I let them figure out what to do when they ran out of clean underwear. So I stand by my original statement. I am a failed parent, and thank goodness, because it was the making of my sons. Thank you.